St. Croix Falls, a city full of preserved nature and history. In the St. Croix Valley, thousands of years of history have been preserved and protected for people all over the world to appreciate. Historical sites in the area include potholes, logging houses, and mills. There is no town that shares more history with the scenic riverway than St. Croix Falls. 11,700 years ago, the last glacial ice age was ending. Ice was melting rapidly, and glaciers were roaring through much of the northern Midwest, forming the landscape we see today. It was of this age that the St. Croix River was born. The river was not as it is today. It was fed by glacial Lake Duluth, the lake that was in the area of present-day Lake Superior. The St. Croix was bigger and faster than any river of today, almost 200 feet deep in places. It created whirlpools of sand and silt that dug into the basalt rock, forming the largest collection of above-ground potholes in the world. When the ice that held in glacial Lake Duluth melted away and the lake itself disappeared, the St. Croix River shifted to a new course, a course that has remained the same until present day. It was around this time that Native Americans first settled the area. Over time, the Native Americans in the area separated into different tribes and groups. In the last 500 years, the main tribes in the area were the Dakota, also called the Sioux, and the Chippewa, otherwise known as the Ojibwe or Algonquins. The St. Croix Riverway was a very important factor in both their histories. The St. Croix Valley provided them an area that was full of resources. They had fish, deer, and other wildlife to hunt. The river also provided them water, and the thousands of acres of white pine were able to be used for their canoes. It was so important that it became a de facto boundary of sorts. Violence broke out between the two tribes over a land dispute, which soon turned into a war, and this war lasted until the tribes ceased to exist as they did before Europeans. When the Europeans arrived, conflict continued despite French interest in ending it. Early white involvement in the area was due to its natural resources, mainly for fur. Fur trading remained a staple in the area until logging became the dominant force. The early settlements in the area were dependent on the lucrative fur trading business, and over time, it passed from the French to the British and finally to the Americans. When it began being settled by American settlers in the early 1800s, fur trading became less important. In the next few decades, it became completely extinct. The area's focus changed when an influx of Germanic and Scandinavian immigrants came to the area. The majority of them settled in various cities in Minnesota, such as Lindstrom and Chisago City. Nonetheless, they were an important part of the area's history. In the 1840s, the city was indirectly settled. Due to an increase in logging and the founding of the Cushing Land Company, St. Croix Falls was incorporated in 1887, and it officially became a city of Wisconsin. The logging industry was the major turning point for the town of St. Croix Falls. It first started when settlers from New England started cutting down vast amounts of white pine and sending them down the St. Croix Riverway to places like Stillwater and other mills along the St. Croix Riverway and the Mississippi River.
Most of the logging companies were started by people from New England. Caleb Cushing, Major Baker, they all came from Maine, and this was a familiar feeling environment for them, and that's how it flourished.
When a greater influx of logging settlers came to the area, the town of St. Croix Falls grew. The great majority of settlers came for logging, but the area provided other benefits. They could enjoy the area participating in town events and experiencing nature. The city provided many natural areas that attracted more and more settlers. From the late 1890s on, the logging industry died down. When the last log went through the St. Croix sawmill in 1914, the city changed. It became a much more regular city with a much more agricultural basis. Today, we can still see this, and we celebrate the logging history with Waningen Days every year.
The logging industry was vital to the area, but they were not into replanting. So as a result, what happened, once the logging industry was depleted in this whole area, all the way from Canada over to Michigan and down towards Stillwater, once that was over with, this area became farmland as opposed to logging industry. And white pine, and probably a lot of that white pine went all over the United States, but certainly in Central America, because of the riverways, St. Louis probably had homes that were built from the logs that were grown in this area.
The Nevers Dam was first built to regulate the amount of logs that traveled along the St. Croix Riverway. The dam had cement footings that reached to the bottom of the river, and the rest of the dam was mainly made of wood.
The dam was removed after being severely damaged in 1954. It was removed in 1955, and the footings and some of the levees can still be observed at Wild River State Park in Minnesota, which abuts the dam location abuts Wild River. In 1883 and 1886, there had been massive log jams at Angle Rock in the dells of Taylor's Falls, St. Croix Falls, that tied up the river for many, many days and prevented the logs from going down river to the boom site at Stillwater.
Because of the weak structure, the dam broke 3 times, the last being in 1954 when the dam was busted and later destroyed. Because the logging industry was depleted and the hydroelectric dam was built downstream, the Northern States Power Company decided to destroy the dam and leave the footings as a historical marker. This location became known as Nevers Dam Landing, and the footings, along with other traces, can still be seen today. Ever since the Europeans settled in the St. Croix Falls area during the 1700s, there has been a point of interest focusing on the potential to harness the St. Croix River's power. Although, the various logging interests and disputes over the rights of the falls made it difficult for the town to prosper initially. After the logging industry was proven ineffective due to sawmills' inability to produce, the Northern States Power gained rights to the falls. This would eventually lead to the construction of the hydroelectric dam in 1907 that would go on to provide more than sufficient amounts of energy.
It was built to accommodate power, mostly sent to Minneapolis from the dam, harnessing the power from the dam. They imported 50 Austrians to work on the dam, 2 of whom died in an accident, 2 separate accidents. It became a vital part of this community, and it also impacted, I think, on the vibrancy of the economy of the district. For example, the high school was built in 1909 and was a pristine, state-of-the-art, beautifully crafted brick building born out of the vibrancy of the community. So I think the dam impacted on that. The logging industry was pretty much exploited by 1914, but there was an ancillary group of businesses that flourished because of the logging industry. And of course they stated this population has been relatively static over the last 100 years or more, numbering a little over 2,000 people in this community.
The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was signed by Lyndon Johnson on October 2, 1968. In 2018, on October 2nd, we will be celebrating 50 years of preservation and protection from the Wisconsin DNR and the National Park Service. Because of their determination to preserve this wonderful riverway, the St. Croix River has become a place where people can experience more than 50 years of history.
It's been a haven for canoers, fishermen, hikers along the river, and bird watchers, and all sorts of activities that take place, and it made this a haven for outdoor recreation and enjoyment of the that unusual natural resource that we have in the river.
Today, St. Croix Falls remains a tourist attraction that hosts many people who are interested in experiencing the history that the town has to offer. We embrace this history every time we hike on a trail or go out on the river. By preserving the nature that surrounds us, we are preserving the thousands of years of history that came before us.